Hey y'all, welcome back. I'm so excited you're all here for Cozy Crime Time with me this week. I know that I've been gone for a while, but I had a baby, I had hip surgery, so I had to recover and recoup. I also have been having a few little technical difficulties on this end of the world. So I have recorded this video now 3 times. So hopefully this is the time that it will go up. Now, that being said, we are going to jump right on into our case today. We have talked about some terrible people here in our weekly Cozy Crime Time, and we've even talked about groups of people. So once in a while, we unfortunately do have one person who meets another person and they are equally as terrible. And they decide that their lives are now intertwined. Today, we're going to be talking about a terrible couple who turned into serial killers. These two lived out their perverse lives together, having more and more experiences until they could no longer do it. In today's case, I will say that there is a trigger warning for childhood sexual assault as well as dismemberment. I hope you all are here with me, but if not, I completely understand. Our case truly begins on September 29th, 1941, in Meuch Marchal, Herefordshire, England, with the birth of Frederick West. Fred was the first surviving child of his mother Daisy and father Walter, and he was also said to be her favorite child and was described as a mama's boy. However, Daisy would go on to have a total of 8 children, with 6 surviving. The family was not well off, as Fred's father was a farm worker, and the family was described as very close knit and protective of each other. Due to his father's job, in 1946, the family would move to Moorcourt Cottage, and this house, in today's standards, was unlivable. The building had no electricity, it ran on a wood stove for everything, and it just was the very bare minimum. Fred's father worked as a milking herdsman and a farmhand, and the children were also expected to complete chores and assignments as well as seasonal jobs. The 3 girls would pick hops and strawberries, and the 3 boys would harvest wheat and hunt rabbits. Some say that this need to work would instill a hard work ethic in the children and later in life, but it also instilled a different habit in Fred. Fred would go on to become a thief, and this would become a huge part of his life. The children would rely on each other for companionship as they didn't have anyone else. As the children entered school, it was noted that Fred was not very bright. He was described as lethargic, scruffy, a troublemaker, and he would end up leaving school at 15 years old to begin work on the Moorcourt farm with his father as a laborer. His teenage years were no better for him, and he and his brother would socialize at a youth center. When he would try to make advances towards women, he would often be turned away. He felt that women were there for his pleasure only, and he could do whatever he wanted to them. Some women did accept his advances, and these women would unfortunately find his performance unsatisfactory. Things seemed to be okay for Fred, besides being a disgusting pervert, until November 28th of 1958, when he was hospitalized for a fractured skull, broken arm, and broken leg. He was in a coma for 7 days, and he would go on to have issues with rage and hospitals due to a motorcycle accident. His perverted ways would catch up to him, however, because in 1960, he attempted to grope a woman on a stairwell. She pushed him so hard that he fell and had more head trauma. The next year, it would come out that Fred had been raping his 13-year-old sister, Kitty, and she told her mother that it had been happening prior to December. He had even impregnated her at one point. His mother's favoritism did become more apparent at this point, as when he was arrested, she stated that she would speak on his defense. When he was arrested, more very telling facts would come to light about his family. Fred claimed that he had been having sex with his mother since he was 12 and that the whole family just did this. When they asked if he had been raping Kitty, he said, "Doesn't everyone do it?" On November 9th, 1961, he was set for trial. Unfortunately, Kitty decided not to testify and the case was dissolved. The whole family did cut ties with Fred at this point, except for his Aunt Violet, and he lived with her at the Much Marshall home. He would reconcile with his parents, but no one else by about mid 1962. While he was socializing and meeting women, Fred met Catherine or Rena Castiello. Rena was born in Scotland on April 14th, 1944. She was raised in Scotland, but she came to England and met Fred in 1960 at the Much Marshall Dance Hall. They dated for a few months and then she went back to Scotland. However, she did come back to England in 1962, but when she came back, she was already pregnant with a child of Asian Scottish race. Her family was not very happy about the pregnancy, and she was no longer with the father of her child. Fred and Rena decided to get married November 17th, 1962, and the wedding was attended by his brother, John. The newlyweds did move to Fred's aunt's house, but just 10 days later, they decided to move to Scotland, where Fred worked as an ice cream truck driver. March of 1963, Charmaine West was born. Though due to her mixed race, Fred and Rena would go on to tell people that they had had a miscarriage and ended up adopting a baby instead. In July of 1963, Rena would go on to give birth to Anne Marie West. Family and home life was not great at the time for the West family, and Rena was said to be struggling raising two children, and Fred was said to be rough, or as we would say, abusive towards the children. The two girls shared a bottom bunk of a bunk bed where they were kept with bars, essentially making it a cage. The children were only allowed out when Fred was at work or not home. While living in these conditions, they met 16-year-old Anne McFall. Anne would spend most of her time at the West home as she had recently lost her boyfriend and she was grieving. The West children were not the only ones struggling at this time. Fred had been cheating on his wife since the beginning of their marriage, and he had even fathered children outside of their marriage. Rena found out about the cheating and began to see a man named John McLaughlin. John may have possibly been the best thing that could have happened to Rena at that moment. When Fred found out about the affair with John, he beat Rena in front of John to prove his dominance. However, John took this as an invitation to beat Fred. This was not the only occasion that John would intervene whenever he felt that Fred was mistreating Rena or the girls in any way. He would act in their defense. Once, Charmaine had asked for ice cream, and Fred beat her on the head instead of giving it to her. John would later say an ordinary man would have just given his child ice cream, but instead he smashed her around the head with his hand. He was a violent and sadistic bastard who enjoyed beating up women and children. Sadly, Fred would go on to lose his job as an ice cream truck driver when he ran over a child with his truck in 1965. Despite being cleared of all wrongdoing, Fred could no longer stay at his job as an ice cream truck driver, and he and the children would move back to England in December. He rented a caravan and got a new job driving a lorry for an arbiter. And in 1966, Rena, Anne, and the nanny, Via McNeil, moved to England to join Fred. Via and Anne were hoping for a new, fresh start in England, but instead, they were welcomed with the dominating, controlling Fred. He would take out his abuse on Rena and Via, as well as Charmaine, and at the time, he began to sexually abuse everyone. He also went as far as to encourage Rena to partake in prostitution to help pay the bills. Rena and Via wanted to leave, and so Rena decided that she would contact John McLaughlin. She hoped that he could come and save her as he had so many times before. They arranged to meet with John, and drive to Bishop's Cleeve with Rena the girls Via and her boyfriend John Trotter. And then they would go back to Scotland together and start their lives anew. However, there was a small flaw in this plan, as one key component was being left out. Anne McFall had unfortunately become infatuated with Fred. At this point, they had even started having an affair and they were cohabitating more often than not. It is believed that Anne knew the plan and she told Fred. Fred went to the meeting place where he and John got into a fight. The police were called, and the girls, Anne and Fred, went their separate ways from Via, Rena, John, and John. Fred even went as far as to tell Rena that he would kill her if he ever saw her again. Fred and Anne did end up moving in together, and they would raise the children together. Rena would travel back and forth from Scotland to see the children, and on one occasion, she stole something from the caravan. She went back to Scotland and she was arrested and charged and sentenced to 3 years probation. Anne truly believed that her and Fred were going to get married and live happily ever after, and that was her forever. Unfortunately, Fred's anger would soon come to a head, and July of 1967, Anne would go missing. Anne was 18 years old and 8 months pregnant with Fred's child. No one ever reported Anne missing, and in June of 1994, Anne's remains, which had been dismembered, were found in a cornfield near Mute Marshall. Her womb may have also been cut open, but due to deterioration, it is hard to tell. Fred would go on to state that he had stabbed her during an argument, but this didn't really match the forensic evidence that was found at the scene. After Anne's disappearance, Rena would move back into the home with Fred and the children. Rena, however, would come and go in the relationship, and she wasn't fully committed. Whenever she would leave, Fred would have the kids go to the custody of social services, and this happened multiple times between 1966 and 1969. Rena would leave for the last time, placing the children back into care November 21st, 1969. Rena would continue to write and try to check in on the children, but so far, Fred's children have just been through the ringer. His wife and mistress were both gone, and Anne was completely missing. In 1969, while Fred was waiting for a bus in Cheltenham, he met 15-year-old Rosemary West. Rose was born November 29th, 1953, to William and Daisy. The pregnancy for Daisy was not an easy one. She was the fifth of 7 children of the Letts family, and they were a poor family that did struggle a lot. Daisy was said to have depression, and to treat her depression, she received electroshock therapy, both during her pregnancy and when she was not pregnant. There is thoughts that the electroshock therapy could have caused prenatal development delays for Rose, and as she grew, Rose was moody and prone to daydreaming. She would end up living with her father after her parents separated, and her father was a paranoid schizophrenic. He would abuse his kids as well as sexually abuse Rose and her sister Patricia. However, despite this, Rose would often be said to walk around the house naked or semi-naked as she entered puberty. She was obsessed with her body as she grew, and she just wanted to show it off. She would do this in the presence of her younger brothers, and apparently, when Graham was 9, she would go on to abuse him and her younger brother, Gordon. When she first met Fred, she was not attracted to him at all. He was 27, unkempt, and she even refused to go on a date with him multiple times. However, as he was flattering her and showing her so much attention, feelings did seem to grow. Fred even went as far as to find out where she worked. He would go there and he would ask a passerby on the street to give her a gift while he stayed outside. After the gift was delivered, he did go in and ask Rose out again. This time, she said yes. The relationship between Fred and Rose moved very quickly, and she would even end up going to the caravan and meeting his daughters, who she cared for like they were her own. In the beginning, Rose treated the girls with love and care and even made Fred take them on trips and excursions. She even went as far as to quit her job to care for the girls full time. Rose's parents were very unimpressed with Fred, and they didn't really approve of the relationship. Their 15-year-old daughter was not only in a relationship with a 27-year-old man, which is already disturbing, but she quit her job to raise his children from a previous marriage. If it was not bad enough, there was also rumors that he had Rose working as a prostitute out of the caravan as he did Rena. Rose's parents did call social services as she is 15 years old, and she was placed in a home for troubled girls in 1969. However, being placed in this home did not stop Fred and Rose from pursuing their relationship. Whenever she would go home to visit her family, she would find a way to sneak out and visit with Fred. On her 16th birthday, Rose was released from the home for girls, and she decided that when Fred was released from prison, because he was in prison for failing to pay fines, that she would move in with him and they would be a family. She did precisely that, and she ended up moving into Fred's apartment and they lived their life. In 1970, her father once again tried to get her away from Fred. He took her to a social doctor, and unfortunately, the doctor told the family that she was already pregnant. She was told that she had to terminate the pregnancy and that she was no longer allowed to see Fred. After failing to do both of these things, her father disowned her. The family ended up moving to 25 Midland Road, and on October 17th, 1970, Heather West was born. Fred and Rose couldn't stay out of trouble, though. 2 months after Heather was born, Fred would be jailed for 6.5 months for stealing tires and vehicle tax discs. Which vehicle tax discs, I looked it up. They are discs that tell you if the taxes have been paid on the vehicle. So, like in America, we have a registration that would be what that is. So, he was stealing those. While in jail, Rose, who was only 17, was left to raise all three girls by herself. It was said that during this time, Charmaine and Anne Marie began to experience terrible abuse at the hands of Rose. Anne Marie broke with the abuse, crying and becoming passive. Charmaine, on the other hand, she never broke. She was even said to tell Anne Marie that their mom would come and save them, and that a real mom would never curse and shout at them the way that Rose did. This enraged Rose even more. And the upstairs neighbor and friend once said that she walked into the home and found Charmaine, naked, standing upon a chair, gagged, with her hands behind her back, being held with a belt, as Rose stood alongside the child with a wooden spoon in her hand. According to Tracy, the neighbor, Charmaine was calm and unconcerned. And on March 28, 1971, Rose would take Charmaine to the hospital for a household accident that resulted in a puncture to her left ankle. On June 15th, 1971, Rose took the children to visit Fred in jail, and he was released just 9 days later. By this time, Charmaine would be gone. When Rose was asked about Charmaine, she would say she's gone to live with her mother, a bloody good riddance. When Anne Marie asked, Fred would tell her she was not the right color. All of these were untrue, though, as Rose had killed Charmaine at some point on or around the 15th of June. She stored her in a coal shed, and when Fred came home, he buried her in their backyard. In 1971, Rena came back to confront Fred about the girls. It is believed that they got into an argument and he strangled her, dismembered her body, and placed it in plastic bags and buried it close to a cluster of trees known as Ye Tree Coppice at Letterbox Field, about 1 mile from Muchmarchell. Fred and Rose's body counts were increasing by the minute, but this did not stop them from trying to live a life that was normal and happy. On June 29th, 1972, the bachelor Fred would go on to marry Rose at the courthouse, with again just his brother John in attendance. Rose was pregnant again, and so the family ended up having to rent out a new home at 25 Cromwell Street. Fred and Rose did take on boarders in the Cromwell home to help offset costs, and Fred even installed a cooker and wash basin for the boarders to give the family privacy. This arrangement allowed for Fred to eventually buy the home for just £7,000. And on June 1st, 1972, May June West was born into the West family. To the outside looking in, the West family seemed to have it all together. But behind closed doors, there was a sick, cruel world that these people were living in. After the birth of May, Rose would start to work as a prostitute out of the home, and she would even advertise in the papers and would take on male and female clients, stating that no one could truly satisfy her needs. Fred would watch her in the Rose Room, which was the room that she had decorated to use to meet clients. The room was complete with several hidden peepholes, allowing Fred to watch her entertain her clients, a baby monitor in the room, allowing him to listen from anywhere in the house, a private bar, and a red light outside the door to inform people when she was working and could not be disturbed. Rose carried the sole key to the Rose Room around her neck, and Fred installed a separate doorbell to the household, which clients were instructed to ring whenever they visited the home. Due to her prostitution, Rose would go on to mother 8 children. At least 3 of them were clients' children. If their skin tone was different, Fred would tell them that they had a black great grandmother. And during this time, Fred and Bill, Rose's father, would end up making up. They even went on to open a bar called the Green Lantern together, and Bill became aware of what Rose was doing in the home. However, instead of doing anything about what was going on in their home, he became one of her clients. Bill becoming one of her clients was awful, but there was so much more going on than just Rose's prostitution. Anne Marie had turned 13, and upon doing so, Rose and Fred both began to torture and rape her. After her first rape, Rose would tell Anne Marie, "I'm sorry. Everybody does it to every girl. It's a father's job. Don't worry and don't say anything to anyone." They also forced her into prostitution, lying and stating that she was 16 years old. The other children did not have it any better either. They were rarely allowed outside the home, and inside the home, they endured physical, emotional, and sexual abuse throughout their lives. Stephen, who was born in 1973, and Heather, the oldest of Rose and Fred's children, both ran away on multiple occasions. They would sleep on the streets or with friends, and when they returned to the home, they were beaten. The West children were taken to the hospital approximately 31 times between 1972 and 1999, but nothing was ever reported or done. Rose would sometimes even turn her anger towards Fred. One time she even sliced off his finger, chasing him around with a kitchen knife. With Fred and Rose both working, they needed a nanny to help with the children. There was just no way that Rose could watch her children and prostitute herself out from her home at the same time. So they found a nanny in the form of Carolyn Owens. Carolyn met the West family when she was hitchhiking home from being with her boyfriend. The West family found out that Caroline did not want to live with her stepfather and that she was looking for a job. So they decided to offer her the job as a nanny. They said that she could live in their home and take care of their, at the time, 3 children. They also told her that they would take her every Tuesday to go home and visit with her family. She moved into the home and she ended up sharing a bedroom with the quiet and withdrawn Anne Marie, starting in October of 1972. Once in the home, she was told that Rose was a masseur. However, she did notice that there were a lot of clients that were men. Fred would also go on to share with Caroline that he was a skilled abortionist, and he stated that many women that he performed abortions on would offer sexual favors to him out of thankfulness. The odd conversations, they didn't stop there though, and quickly Fred and Rose started to focus all of their attention and sexual advances on Caroline. She became so uncomfortable with how Fred and Rose treated her that she decided that she wanted to return home. On December 6th, 1972, the Wests executed their plans to get Carolyn back. They went to the A40, which was the road that she was known to hitchhike on, and they apologized to her and lured her into the car. They took her back to the West home, where Fred and Rose would tie her up, give her drugged tea, and they would sexually assault her. Caroline fought back as much as she could, but after Rose forced herself on Caroline, Caroline gave in to the fact that there was no use in fighting anymore. The Wests were not going to stop until they had fulfilled their desires with Caroline. Fred kept her restrained in the back room, threatening to have his black friends abuse her and saying that he would bury her under the paving stones in Gloucester, stating that he had killed hundreds of young girls. He would end up telling her that she was even there for Rose's pleasure and Rose's pleasure only. After keeping her hostage and abusing her in so many ways, they did decide to ask Caroline if she wanted to be their nanny again. She agreed. She felt like this was her only way out of this situation. After agreeing to be the nanny again, she was released and went about her nanny duties. She began to vacuum the house, and that is when she would decide to escape. She would escape that day through the laundry room where her and Rose would enter the house. She returned home too ashamed and embarrassed to tell her mother what happened to her. But her mother quickly saw the injuries, including bruises, welts, and exposed subcutaneous tissue on her body. Her mother reported the ordeal to the police, and the Wests were quickly arrested. However, unfortunately, in 1973, when they went to try the case, Carolyn decided that she could not handle the ordeal of testifying in court. All the sexual assault allegations were dropped due to the fact that she couldn't testify. But the Wests did plead guilty to indecent assault and causing actual bodily harm. They were fined 50 pounds and set free. Poor Caroline was so distraught after this ordeal that she would attempt suicide. The physical and sexual abuse at the home got so bad for the children that in 1979, Anne Marie ended up running away from home. Anne Marie leaving meant that all the attention was now on Heather and May. Their brother Stephen also stated that he would have to endure large amounts of abuse at the hands of his father and mother. Fred would begin to rape both girls, stating, "I made you. I can do whatever I want with you." Heather had the hardest time of the three with all of these actions, and it was said that she wanted to run away and hide from all people. At just 16 years old, Stephen would end up being evicted from the home because he did not want to participate in sex with his mother when he turned 17. Heather had her own issues with the abuse at home, and she would even refuse to change at school. She once did, and the school noticed there was bruises all over her body. She would eventually confide in a friend about what was going on in the home, and as soon as she could, in 1986, she applied for jobs to leave the home. On June 18th of 1987, she was turned down for the job of her dreams. She cried all night in the home, but by the next morning, she was back to her usual self, looking miserable, biting her nails, and sitting on the couch bouncing back and forth. The kids went to school, and when they returned home, they found that Heather was gone. They asked what happened to her, and the first story was that she had ended up getting the job, and she left. The other story was that she ran away to marry her lesbian lover. When the children suggested that they reported her missing, Fred would say no, because she was on the lam due to committing credit card fraud. Fred would eventually start threatening the children that they would end up in the patio like Heather if they either misbehaved or divulged the mistreatment they endured to anyone outside the home. The West family was living this awful life in peace until May of 1992, when everything would start to crumble. In May of 1992, Fred would ask their 13-year-old daughter, Louise, to take something downstairs. The other children could hear her yelling, "No, don't." She was found by her siblings bleeding, crying, and doubled over in pain, stating that Fred had raped and sodomized her. When she told Rose, she said, "Oh, well, you were asking for it." This would continue for weeks, and Rose would continue to say things like, "Well, what did you expect?" Louise finally got up the courage to reach out for help. She confided in her friend what happened on August 4th, 1992. The friend then told her mother, as any child would, and the mother phoned the police. On August 6th of 1992, the police would go to search the West home on the guise that they were looking for stolen property. They found sexual paraphernalia as well as pornography, including home videos. However, they did not find anything that included the children. Louise would go on to testify about the abuse and how it began when she was 11, and that her mother was completely indifferent to it. The children were all taken to specially trained solicitors who talked about accusations. All the children were taken into foster care, and there they were examined by a medical examiner that found signs of physical and sexual abuse in all of the children. The children also shared that Rose was the one to inflict all of the physical abuse on them. This is also when they would begin to share about their family joke, the one where Fred would tell them that they would be stuffed under the patio like Heather if they misbehaved. With the information provided from the children, the police began a full investigation into everything. Fred would be charged with 3 counts of rape, 1 of buggery, and with Rose as an accomplice. She was also charged with child cruelty, inciting her husband to engage in sex with their daughter, and obstructing the police. The police began to question the Wests about where Heather was. They insisted that she was safe and that Rose had given her £600 when she left the home. Rose was released on bail, barring that she was not allowed to have any access to any of her children, her stepdaughter, or her husband prior to the upcoming trial. Anne Marie, with the support of her husband Chris, came forward to share what had happened to her in the home, and Chris even came forward stating that Heather had opened up to him about being unhappy and wanting to leave the home. He had offered to talk to Fred and Rose, but Heather urged him not to, as she feared for her life. The police were now fully invested in looking for Heather. Unfortunately, the case against Fred and Rose would crumble again, as May, June, and Louise decided that they could no longer testify against their own family in June of 1993. Even with the charges dropped, the younger children did remain in care and were allotted supervised visits with Fred and Rose. All of the remaining support they had from family was severed after the claims, even though they insisted that the claims were false. The police still continued to look into the disappearance of Heather West, and now they added Charmaine and Rena to that list. On February 24th of 1994, the police would execute a new search warrant on the West home at 25 Cromwell. When they arrived, Rose was home, and they presented the warrant to search the back garden for Heather. Rose was upset and told Stephen to get Fred. Fred is at work in Stroud, which was about 3 hours away, and it took him a while to get home. While Fred was on his way home, they asked Rose about the circumstances surrounding Heather leaving. She shouted, "I can't fucking remember. It's a bloody long time ago. What do you think I am, a bloody computer?" Wasn't that long ago. Plus, she was her child, so I feel like she should know where her child is. When Fred arrived home, he informed the family that he would go to the police station and give a voluntary statement about what happened to Heather. He stated that she was alive and well, and involved in a drug cartel, and that the joke about Heather being buried under the yard was all made up. The police were not convinced with Fred's story. So Fred changed his story up, and he decided that they were just against him because he had been acquitted of the rape charges against his daughter. The police left for the evening, but they did leave a uniformed officer behind to watch the home. The next morning, detectives returned to 25 Cromwell to continue the search for Heather. And once there, Fred requested to be taken into custody and arrested, be taken to Bearland Police Station for the murder of Heather and for further confessions. He was arrested and formally held. At 11:15 a.m., Fred would, in an attempt to save Rose, admit to the police that he had strangled Heather, dismembered her body, and even went on to tell the police that they were searching in the wrong spot in the yard. Fred offered to help the police by showing them where Heather was buried. After hearing the confession, his lawyer and the assigned guardian would go to the home and tell May and Stephen that Fred had killed Heather. Stephen was distraught and May was in shock, just saying he didn't do it. While Fred had been arrested by his own request, Rose was also arrested on the morning of the 25th on suspicion of murder. Despite Fred telling the police that they didn't need to look where they were currently looking, the police continued searching in the yard. By 4 p.m. on the 26th of February, a thigh bone was found in the area that Fred told them not to look in. That was not all that was found, though. In the area Fred told them Heather was buried in, they found a dismembered heap of bones. The police took the bones back for dental and DNA testing and concluded that it was, in fact, Heather West. Fred ended up recanting his confession of Heather's murder while the excavation was underway. However, once they discovered the bones, he again confessed. They began to question him about the second set of remains, which he had said belonged to Shirley Robinson. Shirley was a 19-year-old woman who was from Leicestershire and later lived in both Germany and West Midlands. She was said to look very similar to Rose, and some even said that she believed that she was Rose's replacement. She boarded with the West family for some time, and rumors said that Rose wanted Shirley gone. In May of 1978, Shirley would go missing while 8 months pregnant, and she was never reported missing to the authorities. Fred was officially charged with the murder of Heather. The excavation crew did not stop, and they found a third set of remains in the yard. When asked about these, Fred stated that they were a friend of Shirley's, but it did turn out that the remains belonged to 16-year-old Allison Chambers. Allison was born in Germany but moved to England, and due to the fact that she went missing in January of 1979, while she was living in a care home, she was labeled an absconder of care. She had told people that she was talking to an older man and he was buying her things and spoiling her. There is no connection between her and Shirley other than Fred stating that they were friends. The body count was starting to add up for Fred. While being questioned, he spoke with his lawyer and wrote a note to the leader of the murder investigation. This stated, I, Frederick West, authorize my solicitor, Howard Ogden, to advise Superintendent Bennett that I wish to admit to further approximate 9 killings. Expressly, Charmaine, Rena, Linda Goff, and others to be identified. F. West. Fred did not just stop with the letter, though, as he went on to state that there was approximately 6 more bodies at the Cromwell home. He said that these women were hitchhikers that he had picked up in the 70s who had threatened to tell Rose of his indiscretions. Rose already knew of his infidelity, so it wasn't a big deal that he was cheating. He claimed to have killed them, transported them to Cromwell Street, and then dismembered them and buried 5 in the basement and 1 beneath the ground floor bathroom. He again told the police that he would show them exactly where the bodies were. And by March 8th, the police had found all 6 women who had been terribly tortured and abused before their deaths. The admissions did not stop there. He also told the police that Rena, Charmaine, and Linda Goff were all killed by his hands as well. He told them Rena was buried in Kempley and took the police there. Exhumations at the yard at Cromwell and now in Kempley at Letterbox Field continued. The evidence left behind with these bodies indicated the cruel and depraved minds of Fred and Rose. While the home continued to be searched, Rose sat in a safe house and their children remained in care. Fred insisted that Rose had nothing to do with any of the murders, and investigators did not believe that she was not involved. But on an unrelated charge, Rose was arrested on April 20th, and she was arrested for the rape of an 11-year-old girl and assault of an 8-year-old boy in the 1970s. She was placed in a maximum security cell where police would go on to question her about the multiple murders that took place in her home. On April 24th, she was officially charged with the murder of Linda Goff, and by May 6th, Rose and Fred were both charged with 5 counts of murder. She insisted that she was innocent. Fred admitted to multiple murders, stating that Rose was innocent, that she had nothing to do with any of this. He assisted police in the location of the remains. The one person he stated he did not murder, he knew the location of, and that was Anne McFall. Fred was placed on suicide watch after the formal charges were filed. Due to this, he was checked on every 15 minutes. On June 30th, Fred and Rose would appear in front of a magistrate. Rose was clearly uncomfortable when Fred would attempt to touch her multiple times, and he was charged with 12 counts of murder, becoming 13 in July after the identification of Anne McFall's remains. Rose was charged with 9 counts of murder, and they were released on remand, but Fred was rearrested after the new charges for Anne McFall were filed. Fred would fall into a deep depression at this time, and Rose, she played the part of the innocent mother and wife who lost her daughter and stepdaughter to a terrible husband, and she played the part well. She refused to communicate with Fred in any way, even after he begged his children to relay messages for him. Rose, refusing to talk to him, broke him, and he recanted her innocence. He told the police and everyone that she had participated in all the murders except Anne McFall, who he claims Rena killed. Rena, who cannot defend herself because he killed her. Fred's depression would worsen as time went on, but on January 1st, 1995, after constructing a rope of laundry tags and a blanket, he would go on to kill himself due to asphyxiation. He did leave a note to Rose, May, and Stephen, and it would state, "Well, Rose, it's your birthday on the 29th of November, 1994. And you will be 41 and still beautiful and still lovely, and I love you. We will always be in love, and the most wonderful thing in life was when I met you. Our love is special to us, so love, keep your promises to me. You know what they are. Where we are put together forever and ever is up to you. We loved Heather, both of us. I would love Charmaine to be with Heather and Rena. You will always be Mrs. West all over the world. That is important to me and to you. I haven't gotten you a present, but all I have is my life. I will give it to you, my darling. When you are ready, come to me. I will be waiting for you." At the bottom, there was a drawing of a gravestone which stated, "In loving memory, Fred West, Rose West, rest in peace where no shadow falls. In perfect peace, he waits for Rose, his wife." On January 1st, Fred's reign of terror ended permanently. Thank goodness. He was a danger to himself and others for way too long. Though this may not have allowed the family's closure, it did mean that there would be no more torture and trauma caused by Fred. The charges in the case against Rose was still pending, and in February, Rose's pretrial began. She pled not guilty to 10 charges of murder, now having Charmaine's murder added to the original 9 after Fred's suicide. The 2 counts of rape and indecent assault to young girls, and her trial began on October 3rd, 1995. The judge in the trial did allow for Fred and Rose's previous sexual misconduct of women to be admitted to establish a pattern of behavior. After a 7-week trial, the judge instructed the jury that circumstantial evidence is enough to find guilt. And also, if 2 people committed the crime, they are both responsible for the crime. Beginning on November 21st and into the 22nd, Rose was found unanimously guilty of all charges. She was sentenced to life in prison, and her crimes were described as appalling and depraved. The judge did emphasize that she would never be paroled, and she was incarcerated at HMP Bronzefield as a Category A maximum security prisoner. She was later transferred to HM Prison Low Newton before, in 2019, being transferred to HM Prison Newhall, where she continues to protest her innocence. The Wests had many victims, and they include possibly 15-year-old Mary Balstam. Mary was a teenage waitress at a cafe that Fred frequented, and she was abducted from a bus stop in Bristol Road, Gloucester. Fred confessed to the police that he had killed her after raping her in his car. She is believed to have been buried at Bishop's Cleeve, but they were unable to charge Fred as they were unable to find her body. They did end up excavating the grounds at the cafe, but they were unable to find her body there either. Carol Ann Cooper was 15 years old. She had been placed into care following her mother's death in 1966, and she was last seen alive by her boyfriend in the suburb of Warndon, boarding a bus to her grandmother's house. Fred referred to Cooper as Scarhand in reference to a recent firework burn that she had sustained on her hand. She was the final victim unearthed from the cellar at the West home. Lucy Partington was 21. She was an Exeter University student and the cousin of novelist Martin Amis. She was abducted from the bus stop along A435. Her precise date of death may have been 1 week after her disappearance in December, as Fred admitted himself to the casualty unit at the Gloucester Royal Hospital for a serious laceration to his right hand on January 3rd. They believe that it was possibly sustained while dismembering her body. Her body was discovered in Cromwell Street on March 6, 1994. Teresa Settenhanger, she was 21, and I apologize if I said her last name wrong. She was a sociology student at Greenwich Community College. She was abducted by the West as she was hitchhiking from South London to Holyhead. Fred mistook her Swiss accent for Dutch, and he would call her the Dutch girl or Tulip. She was reported missing by her family to Scotland Yard in Switzerland when communication with their daughter ceased. Shirley Hubbard was 15, and she was a foster child abducted from a Droitwich bus stop on the River Severn, traveling home from a date and last seen by her boyfriend. She had been attending a work experience in Worcester, and she had promised to meet him the next day. Her remains were found in the section of the cellar known as the Marilyn Monroe area. Juanita Mott was 18. She was a former lodger at 25 Cromwell Street, but she was living with a friend in Newent when she disappeared. She was believed to have been abducted by the Wests, and she was hitchhiking along the B4215. He would refer to her as the girl from Newent when he confessed to her murder. On top of murder and rape, Fred did plan on selling one of his children that he had fathered with Shirley Robinson before he murdered her while she was 8 months pregnant. After the suicide of Fred and the conviction of Rose, life changed, not just for the West children, but in the community as well. The youngest West children had their identities changed for protection, and Anne Marie unfortunately attempted suicide twice after testifying against her stepmother. Stephen also attempted suicide and unfortunately was arrested and jailed for 9 months for having unlawful sex with a 14-year-old girl on multiple occasions. The home at 25 Cromwell was demolished and replaced with a walking path in October of 1996. Fred's brother John would kill himself in November of 1996 while awaiting the jury verdict in his trial for the alleged multiple rapes of his niece Anne Marie and another underage girl at Cromwell Street in the 1970s. Rose did state on multiple occasions that she planned to appeal her conviction, but in 2002, she abandoned this quest for appeal. In 2004, one of the West's youngest children, Barry, claimed to have witnessed the murder of his sister, Heather. According to Barry, who was 7 at the time, Fred and Rose had restrained and then sexually and physically abused Heather before Rose had repeatedly stamped upon her head until she ceased to move. Barry West would go on to take his own life via a suspected drug overdose in October of 2020 at the age of 40 years old. For several years prior to his death, he is known to have battled with drug addiction and psychiatric problems as a result of the abuse he witnessed and endured as a child. These two people were some of the most depraved and sadistic people I have ever researched. I struggled very much with the idea of someone doing this to their own children, as well as other random girls and women of the community. Fred and Rose took advantage of young women who were running away from their problems. They sexually, emotionally, physically, and mentally abused not only their own children, but others as well. They left lifelong psychological scars and physical scars in the brains and bodies of their children, as well as anyone who interacted with them. They, in my opinion, are some of the worst people to have ever been with each other, and they clearly were terrible enough on their own. But putting two terrible people together ends up with so much worse. The system failed the children and anyone else who interacted with them by letting them go on so many occasions. That's my case for today. I know it was a long one and I know it was intense. I hope you all have a great week. Have a great day. Stay safe. And if you have any suggestions on cases, please do not hesitate to go over to my Discord and suggest them. That is all I have. Have a great day. Bye.